They're trading Caitlin Clark to the Los Angeles Sparks. Let me just set the stage. Lynn Dunn, the 90-year-old former Purdue coach, former Indiana Fever coach, she's out getting the messaging out on
one post. That's all it took. One single post online, and suddenly the entire basketball world lost its collective mind. The claim was simple, direct, and absolutely explosive. Caitlin Clark, the most talked about athlete in women's basketball history, the player who single-handedly turned regular season WNBA games into must-watch primetime television, is reportedly being traded to the Los Angeles Sparks. Now,
they're trading Caitlin Clark to the Los Angeles Sparks. Let me just set the stage. Lynn Dunn, the 90-year-old former Purdue coach, former Indiana Fever coach, she's out getting the messaging out on what they're about to do to Caitlin Clark.
You know, your culture is so important to the foundation of what you do. I had to let a superstar go one time for academic reasons, and it was tough, and she couldn't stand me. I had to kick her off the team. She left the school.
We're being set up. They've made the decision in basketball.
Just let that sit for a second. We're not talking about some mid-roster role player getting shuffled around in an off-season deal that nobody pays attention to. We are talking about the woman who made casual sports fans, people who had never...
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar ended up in Los Angeles. Shaquille O'Neal ended up in Los Angeles. LeBron James ended up in Los Angeles. This is what the NBA does. Should we be shocked they're doing it with the WNBA? And they've already, in my mind, identified the coach for Caitlin Clark in Los Angeles, a woman named Corey Close.
I coached Caitlin Clark for 2 summers in USA Basketball. She's got her confidence is incredible, and her ability to take something on her back, to seize a moment is unlike many things we've ever seen.
And so they're doing a crash landing of Caitlin Clark, and what the NBA does is send its biggest stars.
You're probably sitting there asking,
watched a single minute of women's basketball in their entire lives, actually set reminders on their phones for tip-off times. The woman who turned the Indiana Fever from a forgotten franchise into a nationwide phenomenon practically overnight.
To Los Angeles. Listen, the Indiana Fever is being run like a local corner store. Okay, it looked like it's being run by the nieces and nephews that are just getting a few dollars to help out Unc with the business, and it's unprofessional, and it doesn't seem fit for a star like Caitlin Clark. Although we felt like it would be a good fit, especially with her Midwest roots and her core fan base being there, but they've mishandled it to the point where it doesn't matter. Her fans aren't even showing up to games anymore. You see the agendas that they're putting out with the games. Her fans don't really aren't into all of that. They are into...
And within hours of that post going live, it had racked up over 2 million views. 2 million. The comment sections were on fire. Sports talk shows were scrambling to cover it. Analysts were picking sides. Fan bases were at each other's throats. The entire conversation around the WNBA shifted in a single afternoon. But here's the thing that most people completely missed while they were busy arguing about it. Before you pick a side, before you decide whether this is real or ridiculous, you need to understand exactly where this rumor came from, who's pushing it, and what's actually fueling it behind the scenes. Because the truth behind this story is way more layered than any headline is going to tell you. And some of it, honestly, paints a picture that's a whole lot darker than you'd expect. So let's rewind to the beginning and trace this thing back to its source. The person who lit the match on this entire firestorm was Jason Whitlock. Now, if you know Whitlock, you already know what you're getting. He's a provocateur. He's someone who understands the media game at an elite level, and he knows exactly how to craft a statement that will generate maximum outrage. His claim was bold and specific. He said the Indiana Fever were preparing to ship Caitlin Clark out to Los Angeles. He didn't hedge it with a bunch of maybes or what-ifs. He dropped it like it was a done deal, and the internet did exactly what the internet always does. It ran with it full speed, no brakes. But Whitlock wasn't the only voice adding gasoline to this fire. Lakers legend Mitchell Thompson jumped in with his own take, suggesting that the Fever essentially don't want Caitlin anymore. He even floated the idea of a blockbuster three-way deal that would somehow land Clark in a Sparks jersey. And here's the detail that really got people's attention. A specific coach was named. Corey Close, who reportedly coached Clark during 2 summers with USA Basketball, was identified as the person who would be waiting for her in LA. That level of specificity made the whole thing feel less like a rumor and more like a leak. But here's what you absolutely need to keep in mind before you let any of this settle as fact in your brain. Not a single credible WNBA reporter, not one insider with a verified track record of breaking actual league news, has confirmed any part of this. Zero. There's been no official statement from the Fever, nothing from the Sparks, nothing from the league office, and absolutely nothing from Clark's own camp. So we're left with a fascinating contradiction. The rumor is everywhere, it's loud, it's convincing on the surface, but the foundational evidence holding it up is paper thin. That doesn't mean there's nothing to the story, though, because even without confirmation, this rumor didn't just materialize out of thin air. Something real was feeding it. And what was happening inside Indiana's own building gave the speculation all the oxygen it needed to spread like wildfire. If you were watching the Fever's early season games closely, you probably noticed it before anyone had to tell you. Something felt off. The energy wasn't right. And then came the moment that turned a quiet tension into a national talking point. During a loss to the expansion Portland Fire, cameras caught a heated sideline exchange between Caitlin Clark and head coach Stephanie White. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you had to squint at or read into. It was right there in full HD, broadcast to millions of viewers. Here's what happened. White made a first-quarter substitution decision that left a lot of people confused and frustrated. She pulled Clark, Lexi Hull, and Aaliyah Boston off the floor while Indiana was actually leading. What followed was a total collapse. Portland went on a massive run and took a 29-15 lead by the end of the quarter. The Fever never recovered. They lost by 16 points to an expansion team. And the frustration that Clark showed on the sideline in that moment became the clip that everyone wanted to talk about. Skip Bayless took it even further, claiming that White had been fired over the incident. That turned out to be completely false, but the damage was already done. The narrative that Clark and her coach were at odds had been planted, and once a narrative like that takes root, it's almost impossible to pull it back out. To their credit, both Clark and White addressed it publicly and tried to shut it down. Clark kept it straightforward, saying they're just 2 competitive people who both want to win. She acknowledged that cameras are always on her and that moments like that happen all the time in competitive basketball. White echoed similar sentiments, but here's the thing about public statements in professional sports. Players and coaches almost always say the right things at the podium. That's literally part of the job. What matters more is what happens when the cameras aren't rolling and the recorders are turned off. And while nothing has been confirmed about any deep rift between the two, the optics of that sideline moment combined with the Fever's inconsistent early season play gave every rumor mill exactly the kind of footage they needed to build a bigger story. The Fever were sitting at 4-4 at that point. Not terrible, not great. But for a team with Caitlin Clark on the roster, mediocre is never going to be acceptable in the court of public opinion. Player and coach both said it was nothing, just competitive fire. But what happened behind the scenes inside the organization tells a very different story. Now, here's where things get genuinely interesting and honestly a little bit strange. Because the most eyebrow-raising move in this entire saga didn't come from a media personality or a random social media account. It came from inside the building. Lynn Dunn is a legitimate legend in Indiana Fever history. She's been with the organization since 2003. She took over as head coach in 2008, guided the franchise through some of its most successful years, and currently serves as a senior advisor. This woman isn't some outsider shouting from the cheap seats. She's family. She's embedded in the DNA of that organization. Now, I want to correct something that's been floating around online because accuracy matters. Multiple sources, including the competitor transcript circulating out there, have referred to Dunn as being 90 years old. She's not. She's 78, still a highly accomplished and deeply respected figure in the sport, but let's at least get the basic facts right before we start building narratives on top of them. Here's what Dunn actually did that raised red flags. She retweeted an article from The Athletic. The article's premise was that Clark's massive spotlight was becoming a hurdle for coach Stephanie White. Now think about that for a second. A senior advisor inside the Fever organization, someone with direct institutional power and influence, publicly amplified an article suggesting that the team's biggest star is essentially a problem for the coaching staff. That's not a casual retweet. That's a signal. Whether it was intentional or careless, it sent a message that people inside the building might actually view Clark's dominance and the attention it brings as a burden rather than a blessing. And this is where the speculation machine really kicked into overdrive. Some commentators latched onto a separate clip of Dunn telling a story about having to let a superstar go during her coaching days for what she described as cultural and academic reasons. They connected the dots, framed it as a veiled reference to Clark, and presented it as proof that the Fever were preparing the public for a trade. Now, I have to be upfront with you. There's no verified evidence that Dunn's story was specifically about Clark. Rumors suggest it was a broader anecdote about her coaching philosophy. But in the current climate, where every word from anyone connected to the Fever gets analyzed like a classified document, even an innocent story becomes ammunition for speculation. What's undeniable, though, is this. Dunn's voice carries enormous weight within that franchise. And when someone at her level publicly engages with content that frames the team's biggest star as a complication, it creates fractures in the public's confidence. It plants doubt. And doubt, once planted, spreads fast. But the real question here isn't what Dunn said or didn't say. The real question is who actually benefits if Clark leaves Indiana. And that trail leads straight to the West Coast. Let's talk about Los Angels. Because if you're going to build a case for why someone might want Caitlin Clark in a Sparks jersey, you don't have to look very hard to find the logic. It practically screams at you from every angle. Start with the ownership group. The Sparks aren't some scrappy underdog franchise running on a shoestring budget. Their majority owner is Mark Walter. His partners include Magic Johnson, Todd Boehly, Robert Patton, Stan Kasten, and Billie Jean King. Read that list again. That's not just money. That's infrastructure. That's global brand power. That's a collection of people who understand how to build empires around star athletes and turn them into worldwide cultural icons. Now look at where the franchise stands on the court. The Sparks haven't had a winning season since 2020. They haven't made the playoffs since then either. They've been stuck in a rut, hovering in irrelevance while the rest of the league has been growing at breakneck speed. Right now they're sitting at a 4-5 record, which is somehow both underwhelming and slightly better than expected. But the point is, they need a jolt. They need a face. They need someone who can walk through the door and immediately transform them from a forgotten team into a destination franchise. Sound like anyone you know. And then there's the NBA blueprint that everyone keeps referencing. And honestly, it's hard to ignore. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar ended up in LA. Shaquille O'Neal ended up in LA. LeBron James ended up in LA. The pattern is well established. When the league's biggest star reaches a certain level of cultural gravity, the gravitational pull of Los Angeles becomes almost impossible to resist. The city isn't just another market. It's a content machine. It's a media ecosystem. It's where athletes become brands and brands become global phenomena. Corey Close's connection to Clark adds another layer to the puzzle. Reports indicate that Close coached Clark during 2 separate summers with USA Basketball. That's not a casual relationship. That's real familiarity, real chemistry, and real insight into how Clark thinks and operates on the court. If you're the Sparks and you're trying to build a pitch to bring Clark into your system, Having a coach who already knows her game inside and out is one heck of a selling point. On paper, the fit looks almost too perfect. A sleeping giant of a franchise backed by billionaire ownership, desperate for relevance, sitting in the biggest media market in the country, with a coach who already has a relationship with the player. It writes itself. But here's the catch. On paper doesn't always translate to real life, and the reality of what Clark would actually lose by leaving Indiana tells a completely different and much more complicated story. Here's the part of this conversation that somehow keeps getting buried under all the noise. Caitlin Clark has actually addressed this, publicly, directly, and her answer wasn't complicated. She said the sky is not falling. That's not some vague non-answer designed to dodge the question. That's a woman looking straight into the cameras and telling the world that she's committed to Indiana. She acknowledged the rumors. She acknowledged the noise. And then she essentially told everyone to calm down. And yet, the speculation machine kept churning. Because apparently, a player's own words aren't loud enough to compete with the engagement algorithms. But beyond what she said, the facts on the ground reinforce her position. The Fever exercised their fourth-year contract option on Clark, which means she's locked into Indiana through the 2027 season. Her salary is jumping to over $500,000 for 2026 and will climb even higher in 2027. From a contractual standpoint, she's not going anywhere. The Fever have her rights, period. And let's talk about what happened in 2025 because people have short memories and this part matters. Clark dealt with multiple soft tissue injuries throughout the season and only appeared in 13 games. 13. And yet, even with their franchise player sidelined for the vast majority of the year, the Fever still made it within one game of the WNBA Finals, falling to the Las Vegas Aces. That's not the resume of a broken franchise. That's a team with a real foundation that just needs its best player healthy. Now, consider what Clark built in Indiana before the injuries slowed her down. She turned a franchise that was a complete afterthought into a national obsession. Arenas were selling out. Television ratings were shattering records. The Fever were playing 39 of their 44 games in full-sized NBA arenas just to accommodate the demand. People who had never cared about women's basketball were buying jerseys, following the schedule, and planning their weekends around Fever games. She didn't just play for Indiana. She elevated the entire identity of that franchise and arguably the entire league. Her Midwest roots matter too. Clark is authentically connected to that region. It's not a manufactured relationship or a branding exercise. She grew up in Iowa. She built her college legacy in the heartland, and her fan base is deeply rooted in communities that see her as one of their own. That kind of organic, grassroots loyalty isn't something you can just replicate by moving to a bigger city. In fact, uprooting it often destroys it. So if the player herself has publicly committed to staying, the contract legally keeps her in place through 2027, and the franchise nearly made the finals even without her for most of the season, you have to ask yourself a very logical question. Why does this rumor keep growing louder? Why won't it die? The answer to that question has nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with how modern media actually works. Let's pull the curtain back on something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The modern sports media ecosystem doesn't run on truth. It runs on engagement. Clicks, views, shares, comments, arguments. That's the currency. And Caitlin Clark is the single most bankable name in that entire economy right now. Every take about her, whether it's positive, negative, or completely fabricated, generates massive numbers. Whitlock's original post about the trade didn't get 2 million views because it was thoroughly sourced and carefully reported. It got 2 million views because it was about Caitlin Clark and it was outrageous enough to make people react. That's the game. Create a provocative claim. Attach it to the biggest name in the sport. Watch the engagement pour in. Collect the ad revenue. Repeat next week with a new angle. It's a cycle that feeds itself, and it doesn't require a single shred of verified evidence to keep spinning. And it's not just Whitlock. Every single week there's a new Caitlin Clark controversy that dominates the sports media landscape. One week it's a sideline argument. The next week it's a trade rumor. The week after that it's speculation about her relationship with a teammate or a coach or a league executive. The topics change, but the formula stays the same. Take something small, blow it up to enormous proportions, frame it as a crisis, and let the audience do the rest. WNBA analyst Rachel Demita pushed back on the Sparks rumor directly, calling the speculation baseless and openly questioning whether the fit even makes sense from a basketball perspective. Clark herself seemed almost bewildered that the conversation was still going, telling media at one point that she didn't really understand why anyone was still stuck on this topic. But their voices got drowned out, because reasonable takes don't go viral. Measured responses don't generate heated comment section debates. The machine doesn't reward accuracy. It rewards volume. And here's where it gets genuinely concerning. There's a very real and very dangerous line between speculation and narrative creation. When a rumor gets repeated enough times, across enough platforms, by enough voices, it starts to feel true even when there's no evidence supporting it. People stop asking where did this come from and start asking when is it happening. The rumor stops being a question and becomes an assumption. And once that shift happens, it can actually start affecting real decisions inside real organizations. Think about what that does to a franchise like Indiana. Every time a new wave of trade speculation hits, it creates instability. It distracts from the actual basketball. It puts pressure on the front office to publicly respond to things that might not even be real. It plants seeds of doubt in the minds of fans who start wondering if their favorite player is actually leaving. And over time, that constant drumbeat of negativity can erode the very foundation that the team has been trying to build. The irony is almost painful when you think about it. The same media ecosystem that Clark's dominance helped create is now being weaponized against her and against the franchise she plays for. She made women's basketball appointment viewing. She brought millions of new eyes to the sport. And in return, the content machine treats her like raw material to be mined for engagement, regardless of whether the stories being told about her are even remotely true. But underneath all the manufactured drama, underneath the hot takes and the viral clips and the comment section wars, there's one question that actually matters, and almost nobody is asking it. Here's the thing that gets lost when everyone is busy screaming at each other about trade rumors that may or may not be real. The WNBA is at the most critical inflection point in its entire history. Right now, not 5 years from now, not at some vague point in the future. Right now, new expansion teams are entering the league. The Portland Fire are already playing games. The Toronto Tempo are on the horizon. Franchise valuations are skyrocketing to levels that would have been laughable just a few years ago. A new collective bargaining agreement is reshaping how players get paid, how teams operate, and how the league distributes its growing revenue. Television deals are getting bigger. Sponsorship money is pouring in. The entire infrastructure of women's professional basketball is being rebuilt from the ground up in real time. And at the absolute center of all of that growth, driving more of it than any single individual in the sport, is Caitlin Clark. The league literally schedules around her. Networks build their broadcast calendars around her games. Arenas upgrade their seating capacities when she comes to town. She isn't just a great basketball player. She's the economic engine of the entire league's expansion era. And that's exactly why this rumor, even though it appears to be baseless right now, exposes something very real and very important. The fundamental tension that the WNBA is going to have to confront head-on as it continues to grow isn't really about Caitlin Clark versus Indiana. It's about small markets versus big markets in a league that's rapidly scaling into serious money. It's the oldest story in professional sports, and it's arriving at the WNBA's doorstep right on schedule. Indiana is a small market. It doesn't have the media infrastructure of Los Angeles. It doesn't have the celebrity ecosystem of New York. It doesn't have the corporate sponsorship density of a major coastal city. What it has is Caitlin Clark. And right now, that's enough. More than enough. But as the league grows, as the money gets bigger, as franchise valuations climb into the hundreds of millions, the pressure on small market teams to hold onto transcendent talent is going to intensify in ways we haven't seen before in women's sports. Clark's contract keeps her in Indiana through 2027. That's the reality today. But what happens after 2027? That's the question that should actually be keeping Fever fans up at night. Not some unverified trade rumor from a media provocateur. The real threat isn't a forced trade. The real threat is the structural pressure that big market franchises with billionaire ownership groups and global media platforms will exert when Clark eventually hits unrestricted free agency. And the WNBA as a league is going to have to make a fundamental decision about what kind of league it wants to be. Does it protect franchise building and reward organizations that develop homegrown stars? Or does it enable star migration toward the biggest markets where the most money and media attention are concentrated? The NBA chose the second path a long time ago, and it shaped everything about how that league operates. The WNBA now faces the exact same fork in the road. This particular rumor might fade in a few days. The next news cycle will bring a new controversy, a new hot take, a new reason for everyone to argue online. But the structural pressures that made this rumor feel believable in the first place, those aren't going anywhere. They're only going to get stronger. Every new expansion team, every bigger TV deal, every higher franchise valuation raises the stakes for small market teams trying to hold onto generational talent. So the next time someone tells you Caitlin Clark is being traded, don't just ask whether it's true. Ask why so many people are so ready to believe it. Ask what it says about the league's power structure. Ask who benefits from the narrative and who gets hurt by it. Because the answers to those questions reveal a lot more about the future of women's basketball than any single trade rumor ever could. And if you want to stay ahead of all of it, if you want to understand what's really happening behind the scenes, and not just the polished version that gets served up in press conferences and highlight packages, make sure you're subscribed. Because this story is evolving fast, and whatever comes next is going to reshape the landscape in ways that nobody is fully prepared for.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.